You're about to listen to a highlight from The Last Word with Matt Cooper. You can listen back to any of our shows from the last 5 days in full through the media player on the Today FM website or through the Today FM Android and iPhone apps.
The Last Word on Today FM.
With Irish Life.
It's time for the Guinness rugby conversation at the end of what has been a disappointing Six Nations. And could it get even worse against Italy at the weekend, given that there's going to be over 72,000 people packed in to the Stadio Olimpico, probably the biggest game ever played in Italy, certainly attendance-wise. We're joined by three former Irish internationals to discuss the season. David Wallace, 72 caps for Ireland. Jerry Flannery, 41 caps. And Hugo MacNeill, 40 caps from an era when caps perhaps are a little bit harder to come by as well. Thank you all. Jerry Flannery, is Declan Kidney just totally unlucky this year, given that today he picks Johnny Sexton fit again to play it out half, and in the afternoon Johnny Sexton gets injured and can't play at the weekend?
Yeah, I suppose we've had a really bad injury list over the course of the Six Nations, and it particularly put us to kind of tested our squad, particularly in the English game. I suppose you lose someone like Zebo, the way he came on and his form, and then you lose Johnny Sexton as well, and then just the knock-on effect that it's gone through. So we're kind of like whoever's not on crutches kind of goes and lines out this weekend. So Kidney's had a real tough run of it, but I suppose the thing going into a tournament like this is you've got to prepare for that and say, well, if this guy is injured or this guy's injured, what are our contingency plans all the way down? And I think at times it's really, really pushed beyond what you might have prepared for.
What about the criticism that he didn't use the November internationals, Hugo, to prepare for all eventualities? That the time to bring Paddy Jackson in, for example, was not during the Six Nations, it was earlier.
Well, I don't think he envisaged that he was going to have to play, Paddy Jackson, because he, with Jonathan Sexton and at the time a sort of a fit Ronan O'Gara, you thought you'd be prepared. I mean, I think the sort of part of the wider problem is what's difficult this season is because, and we've talked about it before, is because professional rugby is not actually working and paying its way at the moment. They're having to play games that you wouldn't play. So the sort of the November internationals up here and the tours to the Southern Hemisphere down there. So the Irish team coming into this season were practically playing rugby for 12 months with World Cup warm-up, World Cup, Heineken Cup, Six Nations, Heineken Cup, Pro 12, 3 tests in New Zealand. So it's not a coincidence that you're then picking up more injuries than you have before. So I think that's, that has been a difficult background.
But David Wallace, isn't the season the same for all of the countries? And we seem to be picking up more injuries and we seem to be unable to finish out matches. It seems that the Irish teams are now, and this goes back to November, almost incapable of scoring in the last half hour of a game. Why would that be?
I suppose you look at the natural size of our players, especially in the back line. We generally have smaller guys and it seems to be kind of turning now to actually big monsters of men. You look at a few of the players for France, for England, for Wales, at the size of their back line. And unfortunately, there's an attritional side of that as well. When you're playing against these guys, you get like poor Owen Redden at the weekend, the guys who are just, you get hit by or fall awkwardly or be in the wrong position at the wrong time. Even a referee down in France, I saw breaking his leg last week, just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the size and fitness and power of the guys is just getting more and more.
If you were starting out playing rugby today, do you think would you have been a back row forward, or would somebody have moved you into the backs, as I think Declan Kidney did once for Munster, played you in the centre? I was thrown around a few times. I think I came on the centre for Ireland at one stage.
That worked out well, actually. Yeah, I didn't last too long, but I don't know where I'd end up. I probably could well have ended up in the back line, but I suppose it's definitely different era now. I think, as I said, the sheer size of some of the guys coming on now, and backs as well as forwards.
I think one of the differences, though, although it is the same with the other teams, if you look at France and England, their international team, are drawn from a large number of clubs. Ours are basically picked from picked from 3, and at the same time, it does affect all of them, because I think it's been a very disappointing Six Nations.
Hugo, you have made no friends down in Connacht. Remember, Mike McCarthy is playing from Connacht to the Irish team this weekend.
With respect to Connacht, but it's I think a wider question. It's been a very, after the first week, apart from the first weekend, it's really been a very disappointing Six Nations.
Well, indeed, we beat the Welsh. We possibly could have beaten the English, Jerry, and the two of them are slugging it out for the championship this weekend, and we're facing the potential of being bottom of the championship.
Yeah, it's fine margins. It was the same last year, I suppose. If you look at the first game against Wales, when that we could have beaten them, and then they ended up going on to win the win the championship, and that's just how it goes. It's real tight margins, and I suppose the thing was that we probably didn't adapt well enough against England. The weather was poor, and we still tried to play kind of a fairly high percentage of errors in our game. We were taking the ball very flat, and there was a lot of spilled balls, and we just didn't adapt as well as England, and England were,
Yeah, but whose fault is that now? Is that then the players, or is that the coach for the game plan that was being executed by the players?
Well, you can look at it two ways. The players aren't idiots, so when you're on the field and if you've spilled the ball a couple of times, you take another step back. It's not like the players need their hand held going through everything. So like if you're taking the ball very flat on the line and the ball's greasy, it takes you another second to gather the ball. The advantage then is with the defender, because he doesn't have to catch the ball, he just has to smash into you. So I think the players have to adapt quicker there. I suppose I wasn't in the dressing room, so I don't know what went down with Declan, but it's, as a whole,
we don't know. And I think we saw, I suppose, the way England played against Ireland. We kind of played it like England did against France. We kind of copied their tactics. We didn't play with much ball. We just put the ball up in the air and let the other team try and handle it. And in those conditions, that was probably the right thing to do. And unfortunately, we tried to play all the rugby against England, but it wasn't the day for that. But whether that was coming from the coaches or, as Jerry said, the players have to take responsibility.
Yeah, but what does that say about the standard of Six Nations rugby, that you're better off not having the ball, Hugo?
Well, I think it has been a very disappointing Six Nations when you kind of think about that England are going for a Grand Slam, and they're a good side, but they're a side that's just clearly still in development. You look at France, and have just been an absolute travesty of French teams at the moment. I mean, without being rude to Bastard, they're playing a prop forward in the centre. I mean, this is kind of equivalent. I mean, they've been so poor, so limited in ambition, and Scotland, despite good performance against Italy, were awful against us. I mean, I think the problem with our game is, and in fairness, there's parts of our game that have been good. The defence has been good. The scrums have been generally good. The lineouts were good last time. The big problem that we've had is keeping some kind of shape and structure with the ball and taking it through the phases, because we've won lots of ball, and in the modern game, the advantage in the first few phases is with the defence, especially if the day is wet. And unless you can take it through the phases, where people with backs and forwards knowing what's going to happen, you become easy and predictable. And that was the problem against England. The Scotland game was a travesty, because with the amount of possession that we had, and at the end it was kind of individual guys taking the ball and running. And again against France, when we had a lead and we're pressing in their 22, we went through 3 or 4 phases, and suddenly Paddy Jackson, who didn't have a bad game apart from that, he didn't have guys on either side. He ends up passing it back to Rob Kearney on Rob Kearney's wrong side, and he attempts a drop goal. And at that stage, you just say, who's organising, that aspect? Who's organising the attack? Who's organising when we're going through the phases? So because, the good sides who win tournaments, you've got to go through 8, 9, 10 phases at times. The guys know that. And we don't have the ability to consistently do that.
Well, I agree with you on what a lot of stuff you're saying there. But what you said, Matt, that it's what kind of an indictment is on the Six Nations, that you're better off without the ball. I think that was just that particular day against England. If the ball is that wet and that slippy, it's easier to play a pressure game where you make turn the opposition, put it behind them, and then you get a good kick chase and try and pressure them, make them play.
Scotland didn't have the ball against Ireland.
Just hear me out, and let me finish my point before you try and cut me off. If the game had been dry, I don't think England would have been kicking the ball as loosely, because they would have watched the game against Wales and they would have just seen this Irish team are going to damage us if we're loose with the ball. On the day, we didn't adapt as well, but I think coming forward from that game, I think a problem is we've lacked cohesion, and a lot of that has come down to, from that game, we've had so many players injured, and people talk about it hasn't been a great Six Nations, but if you look back, say the 2019, we were very lucky with injuries that year, and we were blessed, and that kind of familiarity with who you're playing with all the time brings a lot of confidence, and you can try things, and offloads come a lot easier, and we haven't had that going on in the tournament. We probably didn't adapt well against England, and from there on we've been kind of mugged with injuries,
Jerry Flannery, Hugo MacNeill and David Wallace are here giving out about the Six Nations in our Guinness rugby conversation. And David, the refereeing hasn't impressed you enormously.
Well, I think they've kind of gone back to maybe refereeing the attacking team this year, and it doesn't make for attractive rugby, because the sides that want to play open flowing rugby and go through the phases and break down the defensive wall that's in front of them, they're not being rewarded because they go through 3-4 phases, and they're being penalised or free kicks or whatever are being given against them, and it just gives the ball back to the team that wants to not play rugby.
Yeah, but hold on, there was
the
18 penalties in the Wales-Scotland game, kickable penalties, a goal, so that would suggest that the attacking team was when teams were being favoured in that game.
I don't know. I'd have to look over the game again, but from what I can see as a general trend down through the season, it's just noticed that every attacking, so not every, but a lot of attacking plays just end up with a free or penalty against them, and it just seems to me that the team that doesn't want to play rugby, that kicks the ball to the touch, that relies on a big pack, to stop the opposition on the gain line, win the line out and win the scrums, is winning out at the end of the day.
That sounds like your era of rugby, Hugo. I thought things had moved on a lot from the 1980s.
Yeah, well, one thing that the era is just this length of time that they're actually taking over the scrums. Now, we're all for sort of safety, but I've timed a couple of games recently where when the moment the scrum is awarded to it gets away from the scrum has been 15 to 20% of the time. Now, it's not exclusive to internationals, but it seems to be taking more time in internationals. And there are some referees who seem to enjoy being at the centre of the stage for that time. But this is killing rugby as a spectacle, and people are just finding rugby less attractive. And there's got to be a way of ensuring safety that doesn't mean that this ridiculous amount of time is being spent over the scrums.
Jerry, have you ever found that you think that a ref has been trying to make himself the centre of attention during the game?
In this, we're referring to Steve Walsh. Yeah. Well, I think the best refs are the refs that you don't after the game you don't want to talk about the ref. You just want to, in a real situation, you come away and say what a great game of rugby, and the worst thing is to come away and be focused on the ref all the time. And I take Hugo's point about the time that the scrum takes, but I would just be afraid of if we just try and, if you talk about it, the Six Nations has been disappointing as a spectacle overall, but the first weekend was one of the best weekends of rugby I've seen in years, and this is so class. I was so excited. And from there on it went downhill, but I think they're working on it and they're getting there, but everyone's going to complain about something,
Okay, in the time we've left to us, will Declan Kidney survive as Irish manager, Jerry, or as Irish coach?
If we don't win this weekend, I think it's going to be very tough. But
even if we win?
If we win, I still think, the guy's been really loyal to me, and I've experienced an awful lot of success with him, so I admire Declan Kidney.
David,
I think people are want change for change's sake, and I don't. Where do you go to? I think he's
Joe Schmidt, Conor O'Shea, perhaps.
Well, yeah, possibly. I think Conor said he didn't want the job.
Could his arm not be twisted?
You want to kidnap him? Is it? Yeah. Take him across. Yeah.
But to be fair to I know he hasn't been harping on about the penalty or the injuries, but they have severely hampered what he wants to do this year. And I wouldn't have agreed with a lot of his calls. Maybe the captaincy at the start of it, maybe with
Ronan O'Gara, Donegal Callaghan omitted from this weekend's
maybe
squad.
that's because maybe Donegal Ryan has been struggling in the last few games with an injury, and do they want to cover off that position a bit more
with Devon Toner?
And does Devon Toner suit that a bit better? But I think it's some people are trying to for change's sake, and
yeah, it is probably very unfair to be talking about a man who's coming to the end of his contract and who has had success with Ireland, but that is the nature of professional sport, isn't it, Hugo, that people are going to speculate as to whether he should keep his position.
Absolutely, but I think we've got to be fair, and I highlighted some of the components of the Irish game that was working. The component of the game that's not working is the attack and the structure. So what I think he needs as the general coach is he needs to put somebody in charge of that who can actually make that work. Now, whether you need to actually change the whole coach, you'd need to be close to the dressing room to actually to say is that necessary. But there are elements of the Irish game that's working, but this shape and structure and organisation profoundly isn't, and his responsibility is to put in somebody who can make that work.
Is this going to be Brian O'Driscoll's last game for Ireland, do you think, or should he be persuaded to give it another season?
It's his decision. I mean, there's a lot of factors that come into it.
Amy's.
Well, it is, but that's one of the parts. It's his family.
Is there not the danger, if he's seen what's happened to Ronan O'Gara and others, that he could decide to give it another season and find not only losing the captaincy, that he could end up being dropped, not on his terms?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's his love of the game. Does he want to play? Does he think his body is up to it? I mean, he's put his body on the line so many times, and he's possibly got a Lions tour to go through as well. It's the toll that takes is monumental on your body.
he's not gonna not play because he's afraid of getting dropped, or else no one would play rugby in the first place, you know. And he's that good a player. I think if Brian decides that he doesn't want to continue on at international level, it'll be, you know, he'll have his own reasons, and it's possibly because he doesn't want to end up crippled by the time he finishes playing rugby, and he think he might get a little bit more out of his Leinster career. But you know, ideally he's going to be incredibly hard to replace because he's still been our best player by a long way.
And Hugo, I don't like to put it this way, but you are of an age where you've seen more Irish rugby players than anyone else in this room. Is Brian O'Driscoll the best ever Irish rugby player?
He is definitely
present company taken.
He's definitely up there right at the very best, and he possibly is. I mean, I would think, in going from eras, that people like Ollie Campbell and Fergus Slattery, who were world-class Lions players and absolutely phenomenal players, but Brian O'Driscoll is up, and you know, and he's done it at an era where it is tougher, where it's more relentless, where the focus on him has been greater. And in Ireland, you know, I always remember him in 2009 being interviewed earlier in the season. He says, "I may finish my career with a Celtic League, with a couple of Triple Crowns, and Triple Crown without a championship doesn't matter, doesn't mean anything." And at the end of that season, he had, you know, captained the most successful Irish team of all time, been the most influential, the RBS player of the tournament, scored the tries at the crucial, you know, pivotal games, and then gone on and won the Heineken Cup with Leinster, and has just developed into such a fantastic role model that the all-round package would be very hard to.
But as retired players, lads, would you tell him keep playing for as long as you possibly can?
Yeah, he'll end up in the studio with you then, otherwise.
I think he actually might end up in quite a few studios. He'll be called upon many times for his comments.
Yeah. Well, you see, you obviously think about this as you get older, and I remember we played in 2009, and myself and Drico were both, because we were the same age, we were both 30, I think, and we went in and we did to do a sponsors thing, and Brian stood up and he talked. He said, like, as you're getting older, he said, you start to think about the end coming, you know. So you start to realise that, look, I'm not going to be able to play in front of 80,000 people or 60,000 people all the time, you know. And you start to realise, you know, the really important things about when you get to play international rugby. So he's been really savouring them and you know, taking them in. And if he decides he's going to go, he's happy.
Listen, to finish up, do you think, will we win in Italy, or could we face a really disastrous season by getting beaten again in front of a big crowd in Rome on Saturday? David? It's
a real threat, yeah. I think, you know, Stadio Olimpico, they have a 50-50, which is probably better than their usual ratio there, so they do seem to play better in that stadium. And the loss of Johnny Sexton today late on is going to be massive. With him, I would have said we would have won. With a little bit of inexperience at 10, I don't know, it's going to be a lot more. Your call, Hugo?
Yeah, I would agree with David. With Johnny Sexton, I would have said yes. I mean, they've got to get up to, I don't know how tired or battered mentally they are, because Italy will produce a big performance. They're a limited side, but they're a very difficult side to play, as they showed against France and a bit, and also in times against England. I think it's a 50-50 call.
And your call, Jerry?
I don't want to be like Mr. Pessimistic for the sake of it, but I think that Italy have a really good chance, and I think I'd nearly think that they for me, I think they're favourites going into it, you know, just because we've such little cohesion going into the games, you know, fellas just hanging together.
So it could be that there'll be far fewer Irish players on the Lions tour as well, but that's something we'll talk about at a future stage. Thank you to all of you for taking part in the Guinness Rugby conversation this evening. Jerry Flannery, Hugo MacNeill and David Wallace.